Good afternoon. We'll try this one more time. Good afternoon. I know there are lots of great conversations going on right now, but I'm going to try this one more time with a hearty and energetic response to my good afternoon. Thank you very much. That's what I like to appreciate. Welcome to the 19th Annual Education in Action Luncheon. My name is Anthony Roll. I'm the Dean of the College of Education here at the University of South Florida. I thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we explore pressing issues within education and the profession. We are here today to bring together leaders within the profession to explore this year's theme of money, politics, and the future of public education. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our university president, Rhea Law. Thank you for your attendance. We know you're very, very busy managing the goings of the university. I want to take a moment to thank the faculty and the staff from the College of Education for joining us today. If we get a small round of applause and then a large round of applause. It's through your work and dedication to our mission that we can provide world-class programs for our students and prepare the next generation of teachers, leaders, and scholars within the field. I also want to take some time to acknowledge our local district leaders as well, who are sitting at our front table. Cynthia Saunders from Manatee County. Kurt Browning. Sorry, and Pasco. Thanks. And our superintendent from Sarasota, Manatee. Excuse me, Sarasota. I'm still learning. I've only been here for four months. Thank you. We greatly value your partnership, and we hope that this event can serve as a meaningful resource in your efforts to provide equitable access and high-quality opportunities for the faculty and students in your own schools. Finally, I would like to thank those of us who are joining us virtually this afternoon from their homes and workplaces. We invite you to join the conversation online by connecting with us via Sildo, our virtual event hub, where we will be collecting questions from the audience throughout the event. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at EducationUSF and follow our live tweets of our presentation today. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker today. As you may recall, Chancellor Eric Hall from the Florida Department of Education was invited to be our keynote presenter, but in the spirit of today's conversation about politics and education, Dr. Hall was called back to Tallahassee to participate in this week's special session of the Florida Legislature and is unable to participate. But to continue our conversation about this incredibly timely topic, I have invited a colleague, a mentor, and a friend, unfortunately from the University of Florida, to give our keynote presentation. Dr. Craig Wood is one of the leading scholars in the field of financing public education in America. In addition to his teaching and scholarship, Dr. Wood has served as past president and executive director for the Association of Education Finance and Policy, past president of the Education Law Association, and past president of the National Education Finance Academy, whose meeting this year will be in Tampa in April. He has served as lead expert involving state constitutional challenges to financing public education in a number of states and has been the lead expert witness involving charter school funding. He has consulted over 24 state legislatures regarding financing public education and many schools. Dr. Wood's career has spanned across being a public classroom teacher, a school district business manager, an assistant superintendent for financing across several school districts in the nation. And of course, he has received numerous awards and recognition throughout his career. He is regarded as one of the most prolific authors in America regarding the funding and law of education. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Craig Wood.
Thank you, Anthony. I can get this, master this area, this button here. Thank you for having me down this afternoon and to share a couple of comments and conversations with you. And I will trust that you will not be overly upset at some of my remarks. Some of you will be, but that's probably okay. And if you disagree with anything I have to say, you're absolutely welcome to do that. In fact, I would encourage you to do that. I start off when I do a little talk, I try to remember George Burns, and that the secret of a good sermon is to have a good beginning and a good ending and have them as close as possible together. And if you can do that, you have a good sermon. So I follow that logic. And so if you look at the state of Florida, I think you have to come to the observation that we are moving toward a hybrid system of financing public schools that has virtues, that has vices, it has advantages, it has disadvantages. Some populations will be advantaged, I suspect, and others perhaps disadvantaged. But you look at charters and vouchers and tax credits and tax scholarships and homeschooling and micro schools. All of these things are coming about rapidly, and you have to put this within the context as I open my beginning class in public school finance, is that roughly speaking, the American people have been in a tax revolt since, give or take a few years, about 1776. Nothing's stopped there, and we continue to do that today. And I have a definition of a fair tax that I use at my house. A fair tax is what somebody else pays. And as long as they pay it and I don't, I'm a happy camper. And as long as you pay the tax and I don't have to pay that, then again, I'm even happier. So the idea that the government can take money off my kitchen table, if you will, for whatever noble purpose, brings at my house some degree of heartburn. Regardless of my background and training, et cetera, because it's money off the table. And you have to look at it in the sense that Americans, generally speaking, our country came out of a tax revolt. We have that culture. We don't like taxes, and I will do everything in my power to avoid a tax if I possibly can. And sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes they actually find me. But the reality of this is that if you look at public schooling overall, public schools are the last social public agency left in our country. And I say that not out of exaggeration, but if you look at the family unit, you look at the church, you look at any social organization, and by and large, public schools, K through 12, are the last vestiges of a commonality of a society. And one could make a very serious argument that we are headed to a very balkanized society. And you can say that some of this is the fault of educators themselves, and that public educators have, in a sense, have created their own problem, in the sense that they have lost sight of the mission and confused social policy, I would argue, with education. And thus we have the rise of charters and vouchers and homeschooling and all these other forms of schooling, because in fact, I would suggest that educators themselves have lost sight of the mission. The mission is to educate children, not to indoctrinate children. And this disturbs a lot of people in our society. Now, with that in mind, I would also argue that in this topic of financing schools and all the options, et cetera, you have a lot of folks who have a complete lack of knowledge, and a lack of knowledge is not a license to start inventing fantasies. These people invent fantasies for a variety of reasons, and the fantasies meet their agenda, if you will, political, social, economic agendas. But the reality of it is that they have no data to support their statements. And you see this constantly like you, I watch the evening news that goes on forever at my house, and be it Fox or CNN, or you pick the channel, and you have a host of folks on both sides of the aisle who are giving me their next fantasy. And I just think in terms of that's a real shame, if you will, for our society. Now, let me distinguish between advocacy and versus research. Community advocacy is one thing. That's a positive thing. It brings issues for people to digest, people to absorb, people to analyze and come to better solutions to social, political, economic problems. On the other hand, if you look at higher education, advocacy is the antithesis of research. When I read a professor's bio and they say they're an advocate for, I just want to stop reading at that point, because they're saying to me they have no research skills. They're saying to me they have an opinion. It's a highly politicized opinion, and they're going to go out and cherry pick research to support that particular view. I find that to be absurd, but you see that constantly. I'll give you an example of that. Our poster child today, this week, is early childhood education. Early childhood education, as you well know, under the spending bill, we're going to spend 90% of it next year is the federal government's responsibility. Second year is 80%. The third year is 70%. And after that, it's blank. We don't know where it is going to go. So what we have here is either A, we've borrowed money, but we don't know how much we're going to actually borrow, or we're going to shift that burden to the states, or we're going to do away with the program. I suspect we're not going to do away with the program, because once you give people an entitlement, they expect it. And that's not to argue against early childhood. Early childhood may be the world's greatest idea. It is to say you cannot borrow money for programs that are extremely expensive, that the agenda is not clear. We have no idea how we're going to pay for early childhood 5 years from now. We have no idea. Zero idea. Nobody has put an idea on the table, even a bad idea. A bad idea sometimes is okay. Just give me a bad idea. I can deal with that one, but you have no idea. So what we have here is what I call an aspirational statement. And I won't read that to you. Of course, you're very familiar with it. Florida Constitution, Article 9, Section 1 is an aspirational statement. When they changed the Constitution this last time, I argued, obviously with great failure, I argued that this was the worst thing you could possibly do, is to have all of these laudatory aspirational statements in your Constitution. John Mills rejected that idea. To this day, he doesn't acknowledge it. But that is the basis by which the last court case in Tallahassee, that they said, the Supreme Court of the state of Florida simply said, these are aspirational statements. If you make something so aspirational, we can't meet it. And if we do meet it, we can't spend enough money. So rather than having something concrete and tangible that you could perhaps meet, we're going to have something that is a poster child. We're going to have something that's aspirational. We're going to have something that's a fantasy. And thus, by definition, we never be able to meet it. And thus, by definition, we don't have to fund it. I would argue for your consideration that virtually everything in a capitalist society, and I'm a capitalist, by the way, if you haven't picked up on that, everything is economic and or financial. And if you look at things through that lens, it tends to explain the political, social, and the educational public policy world. Otherwise, you abandon education to advocacy again. You go right back to certain types of agendas, which I may or may not agree with, but you don't have data, you don't have access to data, you don't know what is in fact going to happen once these programs are in place. And if you look at the socioeconomic status of our society, in my view, SES starts to explain almost everything in elementary and secondary education. If you look at it through that lens, we have a lot of progress to be made. And with that in mind, we have the public long-term pressures in Tallahassee, as well as each other places are, it's P-12 education and higher education, prisons, public safety, state, local pensions, Medicaid, Medicare, transportation, environmental, and economic, social, political agendas. If you look at the most recent election in Virginia, and you're all familiar with that, the governor's race, the two issues that decided voters appears to be education and public safety. Education came down to a candidate, in my opinion, misspeaking, if you will, saying that parents had no right to question the school board decisions in terms of curriculum. The most idiotic thing I've ever heard a candidate say in years, but nonetheless, after he said it, he then had to double down and couldn't track out of that. It was the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say in my life, because he just didn't think through the situation. The moment you take parents out of education, you've got a huge problem for a variety of reasons, and one of the reasons we're going to talk about. On the other hand, it was that of public safety. Every time you have a riot, every time you have a demonstration that turns into a riot, be it left wing, right wing, take your pick, then things happen. People become insecure in their presence and they vote accordingly. And so you get into this discussion very quickly. Now, on top of this, which I didn't put in here, the last quarter we had inflation at 6.9%. That's a great hidden tax on all Americans, everybody sitting in this room. Inflation, there is absolutely no plan today to deal with it. And that's not a political statement. That's simply an economic observation. Inflation, if it comes back roaring as it appears to be doing so, if you look at the price of natural gas, you look at the weather forecasts for this year, et cetera, politically speaking, one could make an argument things are going to become much more volatile. Now, does money make a difference? And the answer is, of course, it makes a difference. It makes a difference at my house. It makes a difference at your house and everywhere else. What seems to be the case is how we spend the money. Simply adding money to successful schools does not produce results. Simply adding money to unsuccessful schools does not produce results. It just simply, there's no direct correlation, which we're struggling with. Cautions and misconceptions. Expenditure ranges really don't tell us much. It doesn't tell us much at all. Class size issues are inconclusive. The myth of schools and the greater segregation every year. Every year, what's his name out at UCLA comes out a report and said that schools are more segregated this year than they were previously. And if you look at really that research, it's so flawed, it's unbelievable. But nonetheless, it gets great attention. Again, regardless of the intentions, regardless of the scope and the merit and the strength of your argument, if you bankrupt society, it serves no particular purpose. Engaging in class warfare serves no particular purpose. And the goal is to level up, not to level down. So you get into these discussions very quickly. Where does this lead? I would argue all this leads to choice. Choice within itself alike. Now, for some educators, that's something that they're very disturbed by, but I find choice to be, for the most part, the virtues far outweigh the vices. Charters offer additional opportunities to many people. By the same token, you have to acknowledge on the other side of the equation that non-regulated charters can be problematic within itself and does not tell you about the efficiency of the system. And you have to really analyze Professor Stiglitz and his non-efficient marketplace argument. He won the Nobel Prize over that one years ago. And the argument is, are parents completely informed enough to make a wise choice between, let's say for purposes of discussion, public school A and charter school B? And there's some question to that, of course. I would argue that we choose everything else from doctors and lawyers and everything else, and we seem to manage reasonably well. We go back to Justice Brandeis in his famous 1939 decision, The Laboratories of Democracy. Laboratories of democracy is this concept. As long as the state legislature is not in conflict with the state constitution, it can do just about whatever it jolly well pleases in terms of organization of public education. And so it is a laboratory of democracy. It is allowed to make mistakes. If you read state constitutions, they are very interesting creatures. I always forget it's Oregon or Washington has the right, quote unquote, a man has the right to liquor by the drink. That's a state constitution I like. These folks had their priorities set straight. But in any event, you get this. You have charter schools in 46 states, and depending on how you want to count them, some say it's 45. West Virginia just passed their charter school legislation, last month, and you serve over 3 million students. In some states, they serve largely minority populations. And in those states, those minority populations achieve more than the public school population when you control for certain things. Now, that's not always the case, but to make the argument that the public school folks, well, the charter schools are taking the cream of the crop. Charter schools are not taking the cream of the crop. The parent is choosing to take their kid out of that school to put in a charter school. And why is that? Because A, they see more achievement, and B, they perceive it to be safer. Achievement, safety. Safety, achievement. Those are the two reasons when you look at folks who make that decision. Now, we have the growth of the hybrid system. We have state corporate tax credits and deductions. We have that in the state of Florida. We have educational scholarships, savings account, individual tax credits. If you get into that, it gets pretty complicated very quickly. If you look at FEFP, the way we distribute monies in the state of Florida, there are two issues there that probably need to be worked on. A, there's got to be a poverty index when it's not there. And B, you've got to bring in the assessed values closer in relationship to the retail values, but that's kind of problematic politically. Legislative proposals, they will always cherry pick. You give them a proposal that contains 20 items, and they may pick 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but they will cherry pick them. It's politics by printout. Where is my district? Do they get more money or not? Who can pander to the greatest mass? When I watch the evening news, be it the right wing or the left wing, both are pandering to the greater mass. That's the name of the game. Most proposals talk about legislative fixes, and I have an illustration here of a legislative fix. And I guess in some circumstances, it works okay. So the real question here is asking the right questions is the first issue. And with that, I've just given you a very brief overview of the area. I don't necessarily have answers that are acceptable to you. I have answers that are acceptable to me, but that's not the test. So with that in mind, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Roll.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Both timely, definitely thought-provoking. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel of experts who will be joining Dr. Wood to discuss how the topic is directly impacting public schools across Florida. Our first panelist joining us this afternoon is Dr. Carly Simon. Thank you. Superintendent of Alachua County Public Schools and former executive director of the National Education Finance Academy. Dr. Simon is an expert in educational leadership, school finance, and infrastructure. Our second panelist is Dr. Dina Cushingberry, former superintendent of the Metropolitan School District of Warren Township outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, and author of Vertigo, Transforming Teaching and Learning in Public Education. And our third and final panelist joining us this afternoon is Dr. William Black, Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at USF, and the immediate past president of the University Council for Educational Administration. So I'd like to begin by just asking a simple question. Dr. Wood questioned the purpose of public schooling and asserted that with all public schooling's positive and negative strictures, that choice might be a viable solution. How would you respond to that?
I would say choice has always been a parent's right, and parents have always had the right to choose. But I would challenge the purpose of education first started out as developing social order and reading, writing, arithmetic, civics, morals. And now we have social trust issues. And people right now aren't trusting democracy. And right now, that is what's under attack. We need to redefine what school needs to look like as far as public school. I think that we also need to think about reading, writing, arithmetic, and rational. Because there's a lot of things that are happening right now that just aren't rational. So parents have a choice. I believe that. But I think we also need to redefine what public education looks like. And we've been talking about that over and over and over again, but we keep coming back to the same things. So that's my.
Dr. Black?
So I appreciate the Dr. Wood's characterization of a hybrid system, because I think we have seen a shift that's structural, that has significant power of waves behind it. My colleague Jeff Hennig from Columbia calls it the end of exceptionalism. The governance structures of education having been local school boards and distinct from other government agencies. And we see certainly in a place like Florida, the articulation of decision-making moving in many respects from the local area to the state. And part of our resulting tensions right now are part of this new hybrid system. What I do think warrants additional response on choice is this notion that choice, like Dr. Cushingberry, the choice has been here, but we do know that there is also significant research to support this notion of who gets to choose, right? And who has the knowledge to do that. It's a rational choice argument, right? Choice happens, better knowledge means better choice. And knowledge is always imperfect. Who has access to that knowledge? Who has access to transportation? When we look at New Orleans, for example, that had a radical change in choice, who's able to transport kids along the Mississippi? There are families that go from one place to another with choice. And what do we lose with that, right? With this sense of the public institution, the community, as a result of that choice. I also, as much in education, the notion of how you cut the pie in terms of achievement certainly plays out, right? Are charters and choice really that much better? That's a complicated issue, and it depends on how you cut the pie. Dr. Wood said in many states, at the state level, that may be the case. You see some uptick in achievement, but again, it depends on the kinds of studies and what you control as to whether that achievement is any better. On the whole, it does not indicate better achievement versus what we call traditional public schools. The third point I would look at is back to the hybrid system, this binary of public versus charter. Those days are over in places like Florida. That landscape has shifted. So I don't think it's very helpful to think of choice as just A versus B. There's a choice landscape. Public schools are part of that choice landscape, as well as charters, as well as vouchers, and we see that in the foreseeable future. The other issue, I think, really does need some questioning, this notion of safety. That's a complicated issue, and I will proffer to you that that is racialized as well. And I think we need to think about when safety gets evoked, and is it evoked around issues of race? And I think that's a very important thing to keep in our discussion as we move forward as well.
Thank you, Dr. Black. And Carly, given the current comment by our panelists on the role of public schools, whether or not choice is a viable alternative to traditional community and public schools, what do you believe the role of parents are in a particular district and how they affect policy? And I will say this now, we do not have to talk about mask mandates.
So when I was in Cincinnati, I was very much involved with Parents for Public Schools, which essentially was a nonprofit that focused on parent advocacy. And the parent advocacy was at, the school level with me, my child. How do I articulate what I need in order to support my family? And that training also went to, how do I become a board member? How do I get up into Columbus and really advocate for education? And so I do think parents need to be very much involved. And I think it's important. The more parents are involved, the better we can shape the programs that we're offering, the better we can service our staff and our teachers, especially on how that relationship is nurtured. There's a lot of trust associated. What we did recognize in this specific situation with masks, which I can speak quite a bit about, is that we have a lot of parents, and a lot of parents have different ways they want to raise their children, and a lot of parents have different value systems. And in this situation specifically, we had this, two ends of the spectrum. We had, pro-maskers and anti-maskers and everybody in between. And it is at that place we reached a very huge issue of how do you provide that parent level of input and protect everybody else's value systems and health. And so it became, we're still in the middle of it, the whole situation where there isn't a resolution, even the Parent Bill of Rights. Well, which parents are we supporting the rights of? Because what we have is they are intersecting right now. I have some parents who will probably want their child to be masked.
Forever.
I don't know when it'll end. And then I have some who thought we never should have had masks. Now they're all sharing a classroom. How do you make that work? And then you have on top of it, our teachers should have their own ability to make those value systems as well. And so we had to, in our situation, look at the greater good of the health of the community, which then also we became educators who had to stretch into the healthcare field, which was an uncomfortable place. We were fortunate enough to have medical professionals give us quite a bit of advice, and we leaned into that hard. But parents should be involved, but we have to figure out how we navigate different parenting value systems because they are not the same at all.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. So what I'm hearing is there seems to be conflict between the historical role of a district to act in place of the parent, for all you legal scholars out there, and local parentis, versus the influence of individual parents within the district. I'm going to turn the corner a bit on this issue to say, with our governor attempting to raise base teacher salaries across the state to $47,500 at a minimum, some parents will not agree with the amount of money that the state would like to add. Some parents will agree with the amount of money the state would like to add. How do we come to a place where our governor, our legislature, school district officials and boards, and parents will agree on how to invest in education? Because as Dr. Wood says, and I do agree, just simply adding more money or taking away more money will be insufficient. That's open to either of the three. Dr. Cushingberry?
Oh, boy. Well, right now, I just got a text from the young man or the superintendent who took my place. And in Pike right now, parents and students are currently picketing because they do not appreciate what raise they were given to teachers. And so everything right now has turned into an argument. What I would say is, what's fair? What is a living wage for a teacher? $47,000 is not a living wage. So I probably am not the person to ask. I would say teachers need at least 51,000. And that's low.
Mhm.
Teachers should actually have $60,000 for the work they put in. They're not just teachers in a classroom. They're also IT specialists. They're also principals. They're also moral leaders. They're teachers. Everyone has had a teacher, and you're here because you had a teacher. You cannot put a value, a price on a teacher. But if you had to, don't ask me, because it would be $60,000 or more.
Thank you, Dr. Cushingberry. Anyone else?
So I'll take that one.
Okay.
So what we've run into specifically with the governor's proposal is that we are having salary compression.
Mhm.
So that is also impacting morale
Can you
considerably.
explain a little bit about the compression, how it works?
So because of the increase in pay for our newer teachers, they're having a much higher scale of increase in salary, where our more senior teachers who have the experience, who have been there longer, are not seeing that. And so we have, people who've been teaching for 9 years who are making the same salary as a beginning teacher. And you can imagine how that really hurts morale for teachers. And I think right now also we have a workforce scarcity as well. And I think we're having a lot of teachers who are thinking, I am valuable in other locations. And because this job has continued to increase the amount of responsibilities, reduce the amount of time at work to do the work, and the pay, I have this compression, I can go elsewhere because this is a sign of what you value. We put our money in things that we value. I think the other thing, and I would agree with the salary component, one, I've been interested in recruiting teachers. Recruiting from out of state is pretty much a waste of my time because the Florida salaries are so low. Get a person who wants to come and do the work. I have colleagues, especially in Cincinnati, and to come here would take such a hit on them financially. It's just not even an option. And that's disappointing because I think we're missing out on a lot of opportunities out of state. The other thing that I've learned, and I've learned this, I still consider myself young, but I think the adage of you get what you pay for is true. And it works in quality of programs that we have, but I also think this boils down to the people. And really the work gets done by the people and not by the programs. And I think that when I look at our finances, are we buying things or are we investing in human beings? And I'd rather us invest in human beings. But I have an entire system of funding that has to be restructured in order to do that. And I think it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of changing. It takes a lot of negotiating with unions. And I think teachers would like to get there, but change is hard. And we need to invest in our educators.
Dr. Black?
I would concur that simply adding money does not produce results. We see that that's very consistent. So it's really how we use it. As the president of the University Council of Educational Administration, we're also particularly interested in administrators, and there's this trickle effect, right? As you raise teacher salaries, what does that mean for administrator salaries? And we've got many experienced teachers that then would say, in some of these salary ladder situations where it's actually a parallel or a drop in salary potentially to take the AP position. So we've seen that in certain places. So that's always a concern to think about that. And I'm looking at Dr. Roll as an economist in conversations we've had, then it turns to what's the compensatory factors, right? So what these things, I love my job. That for economists, right, that has economic value. And so the salary gets put lower because you're willing to take less salary because you love what you do, because you find purpose in what you do. Now, unions would say that's great, but don't abuse our love for what we do to pay us less, right? And that's going to be the argument that they move forward. But I think an attention to those compensatory factors that in many ways are under attack now because of the status of teaching. The status of teaching has dropped. And I don't know how many of my students who have kids that say things like, don't be a teacher to their kids. And that wasn't the case before. So it's not just salary. I think there's attention to status, other compensatory mechanisms, and the stability of jobs matters to people. That's the other thing coming out of COVID. And, Pasco School District is the biggest employer, and it provides stable, not lifetime employment, and that ability to have people stay in the community and continue to contribute is another really important compensatory factor that I think we need to highlight.
Thank
And
you, Dr. Black.
Indiana also had increment. And so with the right to work, the unions have been pretty much dismantled. So a teacher every year would have an increment. So now there's no increment. And a base salary, as you go through the years, one of the highest you could have gotten to was maybe 67,000 as a teacher. And now teachers coming in would make maybe 40, but an average good salary, I believe, would be 60,000. So.
Thank you. I'm going to apologize because I've actually left my iPad on my table, but I want to make sure that if there are any questions that are being posed, I'm going to give Elizabeth a chance to run up with my iPad so I know what those questions are. Thank you very much. So as we continue, another main issue of Dr. Wood's presentation was comments on choice. Choice that was utilized broadly in its terms. And in Florida, we do have a number of different types of choice. Some do provide equitable access. Some choices can only be made if you have information. And frankly, some of the choices can only be made if you have a large income or wealth. Given that not all choice for parents and schools is negative, how would you maximize parent choice within a charter structure while attempting to minimize negative aspects that would reduce equitable access to such a school?
I'm not going to speak to charter.
One more time.
I can repeat that. How are we allowing parents to make choices that will provide equitable access for their students to improved educational opportunities? Dr. Barella would like to respond.
Superintendent Melbourne, when the charter group would come to him, would say, if you are as good as our schools, I will support you. But if you don't perform at a level equal to what we already have in this system, I will not support you. All right? He would support them, but they must compete. He felt he had created the standard in that district. And their achievement, I think, was third or fourth in the state, right, Melbourne? You know that, Greg?
Possibly.
I think it's up there. But my point is, I thought Brian took a pretty dramatic position. I don't think there are only 6 charter schools in that district. It's about 100,000 kids. It's pretty nice size. So I think that's one answer to your question. When the public school system guy says, you better be as good as we are, that's telling his community something, I think.
So that is one particular strategy, which is evaluative. But I was really talking about larger philosophical issues. Yes. Meaning parents should have some say in their children's education.
If a parent is what we call well-off, if you are usually a Caucasian parent, and if you're an Asian parent, then you pretty much understand quality schooling. It's the other that you would be concerned about. So we know that education breeds education, and we know that when people struggle, when parents struggle, that their kids and the choices they make for their children will sometimes not always be the best.
So there's a few things. I think one of the things that we're working on, because I think everybody, if we're
Can
looking
you pull
at
your mic just a little closer?
Sorry. If we are looking at choice, then all choices need to be good. And one of the things that we are running into in Alachua County is we actually have charter schools who are doing quite well. They offer a solid program. I think their instructors are strong and diverse as far as male-female ratios. They focus on early literacy. They're doing a good job. As the superintendent of Alachua County, I consider them my competitors, and I need to provide that experience that I know certain families are wanting and getting out of these schools. We are working on things that I know we need to focus on. So we're looking at deficit mentality of our teachers. We're trying to make sure that they really do believe all children can learn, and they lean into their craft of their profession, and they develop themselves. And so we have our own things that we need to do. And regardless if we didn't have the competition of the charter school or not, improving the quality of the experience for our students in our public school system is important for our community. The things that I do find challenging, so providing additional choice with like magnet programs, those are helpful, but they do strain the system because of just transportation would be an example. When you are moving children all over where they want choice, that's funding that is no longer going into the classroom, that's going into getting a child to school. And I think that that's a problem for us because we have a large county. We can lose a lot of funding in transportation. And also any of us who are running school systems now know bus drivers are not around like they used to be. So what we're trying to do is really enhance the diversity of our programs across our county, so we don't have like one special magnet program that everybody wants to attend to. We want to make sure that we have that level of accessibility for high quality programs across the county. This does become problematic when we do run into a choice. I'm very much interested in the 4 agreements. I don't know if you've read the book, but assumptions is a really important point for me. And I think right now we have so many people, teachers, family members, community members, council members, who make assumptions about the quality of a school because they're using like 2 decades old whatever their experience and so forth.
Right.
So choice is important, but I think informed choice and not choice based on assumptions, that's something that we have to deal with. I have some schools that are predominantly Black, 100% high poverty, and they are offering excellent instruction. And I still am struggling with getting families to understand that that's not what this school is any longer. And so I think there's also that intersection of how do you provide choice, but keep from, the rumor mill, the stigma, the history. And I think many of us from Florida, there's a lot of history that anchors people down in belief systems that really no longer have any basis in reality.
But do all parents have a choice? There are parents with students with special needs that can't get into a school.
And
So
right.
all parents do not have a choice. And that's a shame because students should have access to their peers, age-appropriate peers, to general education, and that's how we make a better society.
So you've got a parent right here sitting in one of the most highly populated choice districts in the country. I think over 60 charters and only one will accept my son, who has significant intellectual disabilities. So when we say we have choice for whom, right? And there, it's crafted in, well, we don't have the resources. Well, then who does? Then it's the public schools. What happens when the other important point with choice, my colleague, Dr. Karanja's research is public schools don't close like charters close. What happens when public schools when charters close? Then in the middle of the year, public schools have to take in the kids. And so then it becomes a politics of last resort that play out as well. That becomes symbolically more difficult. I also would, to go to a couple of comments here, this is the role of the university as well and others. There is an incredible amount of work to be done in researching choice and charters. Who goes? Who gets access? Who is denied informally? I mean, we had, again, narratives as a parent. Oh, good, we started early. Well, good thing, because we can kick your kid out now before the start of the public school year. And those practices happen. How much do we know they happen systematically? That's an empirical question that needs to be researched. There are empirical questions about what are the distinctions between for-profit charters that are linked across the state, as opposed to mom and pop public schools. Those are very distinct. Public charters, those are distinct entities we need to research and understand in and of themselves with a set of questions that do relate to values that are political. In this sense, I do believe the concerns of advocacy absolutely should inform research, right? What are some equity questions we want to research with significant resources and with significant rigor, right? Because charters in particular are known for a lot of political rhetoric, right? And to get underneath that, we need to really consider the differences in charters, consider how we can get better data. I just had a doctoral student do his research on different kinds of charters and was struck by the inconsistencies in the data that he could access from Tallahassee, even though he had access. And so we have, how do you get consistent data in a very fragmented system? There are very important questions around that. How do we look not just at outcomes? Are there other outcomes in terms of our collective responsibility, our community outcomes? The public schools tend to be the remaining central common institution in many communities. There's a whole other set of values about people historically coming from different backgrounds together in a public school. How do those play out in this new landscape? How do people learn to be with each other? Those are actually empirical questions. There's a whole set of empirical questions that I think in a state like Florida and a university like USF, we are well situated to investigate. And because this landscape in Florida is particularly robust with choice, and we can inform the rest of the country.
Well, given the last three comments, and this is a question from our audience, I'm going to modify just a bit, that our governor and our legislators tend to be low taxing individuals. A preponderance of our county communities tend to be low taxing counties. With some of the ideas that we've heard from the three of you, we need increased funding, whether it be general or specific to specific types of programs. How, in this particular environment, do we reallocate resources from our existing structure and band together politically to ask for more increases from our various taxing authorities at the county, legislative, and gubernatorial office?
So I think the federal benefits of the ESSER funding, and so we're getting, I think total for us 1, 2, and 3, we will have just under 100,000 or 100 million in ESSER funding.
Can you tell us what percentage of your budget that is?
So I am right now at $500 million.
Okay.
So what I think will be very interesting, and I'm looking at this as this opportunity that this has never happened. I mean, where do we get this type of money to do these things? We're focusing on academic, mental health, and facilities. And we are going to be able to do innovative programs, develop our faculty, really make sure that we're putting our money in. And this is really one of those opportunities where we have money to do this. And so to see what happens when we get to the end and we have the grant cliff, what we have been able to do in this short period of time, I think that will be a very interesting time for us to make sure that, one, we're letting everybody know what we're doing along this window, but let them know that we see this cliff coming. Here's the return on the investment. Here are the outcomes that we're having come out of this ESSER funding. This is what you get when you have funding to do these things. And I mean, I think it's silly to even assume that educating a human being should be this cheap little process. I mean, again, you get what you pay for. We pay so much more for incarcerating human beings Why don't we educate them on the front end, put the money there? So I think it'll be nice to have this opportunity to use ESSER, and it's really kind of a put your money where your mouth is. But I think that's also the responsibility of every single one of us as superintendents. If we screw this up, I mean, what are we going to do after this? Like, this goes into your point of how you spend your money matters more than the money you have. And that's what we have to do.
Dr. Cushingberry or Dr. Black, we have time for one or two more responses, and then I will let Dr. Wood give a
I
summary
can't
statement.
speak to Florida.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you're going to pass on that? So we have what? Oh, yes. Cynthia Saunders from Manatee County, Superintendent.
I have a comment. We were just talking about that briefly. My county just passed.
Oh, there's a microphone coming up right behind you.
My district just passed a 1 mil tax for operation. There we go. 1 mil tax for operations, which brings in roughly around an extra $45 million a year. It's a game changer. There's about 20 districts in the state of Florida that have had to add this tax because, unlike county government, our required local effort tax is rolled back each year. So if you look in Manatee County since 2016 to today, it has been reduced to almost 1 mil. So the reason that we were able to convince our strong Republican community to continue this tax, this is our first renewal, it's for 4 years, is because when we showed the decline of what we're able to tax locally and the revenue that we're able to bring in, if that were not reduced each year, we wouldn't have to go out for extra millage tax. So this just keeps us even to where we were in 2016. If you look back for 20 years, it has declined every year but one. So we are losing funding because of our formula. And yes, you do get what you pay for. If we are not able to hire teachers and keep them, and not just teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians, all employees, if we're not able to pay them a competitive salary, they will leave. And they will leave and go to districts that have had this tax in place. My neighbor right here from Sarasota has had it in place for 20 years. And he was able to hire and pay for people $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 more than what our district could do. So that is one way. So how could we change it? Each district has the opportunity to convince their community to go for the tax, or we could all band together and go to Tallahassee and say, do not roll back our local millage rate. So those are two options.
Thank you very much. And I know I'm running out of time, but I want to say one more thing or ask one more question that I wasn't able to get to, which is, what are our individual views on universal pre-K and who should pay for it?
Okay, so where I came from in Cincinnati, they had universal pre-K for 3 and 4 year olds, and it was a tax, and the voters voted and they paid for it. What has been nice in that aspect is that it was called Preschool Promise. It has been very successful, and so Cincinnati Public Schools has had the benefit of having these 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds who went through the pre-K system. But it was a city vote, and it worked for that community. I do think early childhood education is important. I think the thing that makes me nervous is early childhood teachers need to be paid well, and that's hard to do. I know leadership options need to have that same situation.
If you're going to pay the staff of ECE and pre-K better, are you also going to increase their requirements to be an ECE teacher or a pre-K teacher?
So these,
we're just hypothesizing.
Okay. I mean, so how they did it in Cincinnati is you had to have a certain rating of your daycare center, and you had to go through all of these steps. And there were criteria, and they did push for a master's. And there are those aspects that you are changing the field. I think we should change the field, but I think that I look at it because, by the time we're looking at 5-year-olds, we're missing out on a lot of instruction that other children are having. And then with the reading expectations, again, I look at it, I'd rather put the money on the front end and then have more choice later on in their sophomore or junior and senior year, where perhaps we'd have some flexibility. I think it really boils down to the will of the people.
Thank you. Dr. Black,
I
1
would-
minute.
Sure. Again, I would concur with my colleague. I think it has been, it would be an investment for the future if we think of these not as spending, but investments. That's one way to garner support. And so I will circle back to education is and has always been political. Because their values, going back to Laswell's definition, who gets what, when, and how. And part of the work of this, and I look at early childhood, it is a political issue. It is political ways of acting that get support for this. So as long as we don't see that as a support, something to support, then it'll be very challenging. My one hesitation with this, and this is for my colleagues and experts in early childhood, is when we spend money, we want to hold people accountable for it. And I think we need to be very concerned about using achievement markers for early childhood as a means of holding them accountable, given what it implies for our curriculum. Many of the countries that do very well on PISA and international, they have a kindergarten curriculum where they're not learning academic content. They're learning how to be with each other. They're learning how to be with each other. So that would be my one concern, is if we politically invest in this, is there another collateral effect of our achievement, our push for achievement that may not be as helpful as it should be?
Thank you, Dr. Black.
Well, I agree with both. But I think when it comes to literacy, we need to give kids an extra opportunity to develop some of those skills, because we know that if students aren't reading by the end of 3rd grade, there's going to be a problem for them. And from kindergarten to 3rd grade, that's when students learn to read. And then from 4th grade on, they read to learn. And so we really have to make sure that we give kids the benefit. And I know when I was a superintendent, we always looked at who are the students in the district at the end of 2nd grade who are not reading at grade level. And those are the kids that we really, really focused on in 3rd grade, because we know what happens to students if they're not reading fluently by the end of 3rd grade.
Thank you.
I had one more thing to that. Dr. Black's point about getting along with each other, I think that is actually the other thing that what we are looking at right now in our education system is the lack of mental health support in our bullying situation. That is, again, it's taking up time, it's taking up resources. And I think there's a lot to say about how people get along. I think actually what we're seeing in our board meetings, what we are seeing in our politics, that is part of the bigger issue of how we are getting along, how our mental health is going at the moment. And I think there's a lot to say by helping children at young ages learn how to understand and negotiate. All of that will have also additional fruit, because we also know when our children are stressed by mental health needs or bullying issues, they also are not going to be able to receive the academic instruction at the level that we need them to.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Wood, after your comments, we've been riffing on some of our reflective comments to your statements earlier that have ranged from aspects of school law, aspects of school finance, choice, which is a combination of school law and school finance. Is there a summary that you would like to provide us for your time with us today? You can use the mic right in front of you right there, if you would, please. And I'll give you 2 minutes, as we're already 6 minutes over.
Thank you, Anthony. I guess I'm somewhat overwhelmed with the the idea that one of my favorite rock and roll bands, Dire Straits, if you recall that, one of their famous lines was "money for nothing, kicks for free," or was it "money for nothing, chicks for free"? But nonetheless, money for nothing doesn't exist. And everywhere I go, people talk about, again, we'll just pick on early childhood. I have no objection to early childhood in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It seems to be a most reasonable idea. I just want you to tell me how much it's going to cost and how you're going to pay for it and what's your return on your investment. And the answer to that is nobody's willing to even discuss that. And again, I would suggest that that's not wise public policy. I would be the first to say that it seems reasonable that if we invest in early childhood education, that we would have a return on that investment. It seems more than reasonable, but I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you how much it's going to cost. I can't tell you the debt. I can't tell you how much you're going to borrow, et cetera, et cetera. And however noble the goal is, you simply cannot continue to borrow money and expect society to benefit from it. You will pay a terrible price. And that's not to say you shouldn't do it. It is to say you should budget accordingly. And that's where we are. So I just use early childhood as an example of that phenomena. And the issue we have before us is that everybody wants everything, including myself, but we're not willing to pay for it, including myself. And so there's this natural tension. And so no governor is going to be elected by arguing that he or she will raise taxes. That's the third rail. No governor is going to be elected where they're going to argue that they're going to have a state income tax in this state, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you have, in a sense, is this idea of money for nothing, and it doesn't exist. So with that sobering thought, I'll leave you to ponder that. And I don't necessarily have the answers to that, but I'm sure you will have better answers than I do.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Please join me in thanking our panelists. I do hope that today's presentation and discussion has provided you with some new knowledge and knowledge that you will be reflecting on creatively as we continue to search for opportunities to provide for our students to learn, grow, and thrive. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And for those of you who were unable to attend this afternoon's events, we will have a recording of our time together today on a live stream from the College of Education's YouTube channel and on our website. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch. And as always, go Bulls.